7, come on.
Good? We're good. We will call the September 14th, 2020 council meeting to order. First up, we have delegation. We have Sandy McKay of Makola Development Services and Regina Sadlikova. And I got it right, Director of Development Services for the Regional District. And it's a pleasure to have you in our council chambers. Thank you for your presentation. And the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so very much. Thanks, Mayor Clerico, Council, for having us. My name is Sandy Mackey. I am the Housing Research and Policy Lead at Makola Development Services. And we've been contracted by the TNRD and by the participating municipalities and electoral areas to conduct a housing needs assessment report for the regional district and for the community of Cache Creek as well. So what I'll do is throughout this presentation, I will call out slide numbers for you. I know that I don't have an actual presentation to go, but that should hopefully allow you to follow along on your paper copies. Some of the graphs are a little complicated. You've got color copies, so they should be much easier to read than our last council meeting where they had black and white and everything looks the same. But if at any time you've got questions about a specific graph, please just don't hesitate to interrupt me. It's more fun to sort of chat about this stuff as we go than it is for you to try to remember which graphs you didn't understand 15 minutes from now. So we'll just work our way through it, and anytime, feel free to interrupt. So briefly, we'll go over a bit of an introduction on Makola and the work that we do, the project background, and we'll get to some of our preliminary data findings before giving you sort of the next steps and when you can expect a deliverable for this project. So on page 3 now, Makola Development Services is a nonprofit planning and consulting firm. We do a lot of work across the province. If you are familiar with us already, it's probably because of our housing operations arm. So we began as a nonprofit housing operator. So actually, managing units that people live in at a rate that's set by below housing or is below BC housing or is below market value. And we kind of figured out that in order to get more of those units, we had to start a development services firm to help us build those units. And then we sort of thought, well, in order to make it easier to develop, we also need a community planning arm to help local governments build the conditions in which we can begin to develop more units. So that's sort of the concept to community approach that we have. We've got a partner in this project called Turner Drake and Partners Limited. They're the largest and oldest established real estate consulting firm in Atlantic Canada, but they've got offices across the province, and they do work in every province and territory. They are our sort of data specialists. So we're doing a lot of the project management, the community visits, the engagement, and they're taking care of the actual data analysis. So briefly on the project, on slide 5 now. New provincial requirements are mandating that all local governments in British Columbia, including electoral areas and municipalities. So far they've given some exemptions to municipalities with under 50 residents, but as far as we can tell, those are few and far between. They're mandated now that you have to conduct a housing needs report every 5 years. The first one had to be done before 2022. So this is part of that Union of BC Municipalities funding program, and you are sort of in the second wave of communities that are getting these projects done. The requirements include collecting specific information to identify current and projected housing trends, using that information to prepare and publish an online housing needs report. And then the big one is that when you do updates of your other important planning documents like your OCP or working on a regional growth strategy, you have to include the findings from the most recent housing needs report in those projects. So not only do you have to do it for 2022, but then you have to do it again every 5 years thereafter. So part of this project is hopefully preparing you and your staff to be able to take on that responsibility in 5 years when you need to do it again. So this is establishing a baseline and building a really good tool from which you can work. On slide 6, the participating communities, along with Cache Creek, are Merritt, Clinton, Logan Lake, Clearwater, Sun Peaks, and then a number of different electoral areas. So it's kind of nice to have a few communities that are sort of similar to each other to have in this study. And you'll see sort of in the next couple slides what I mean. It really does help to see not only how you sort of compare to your region, but also compare to some of your neighboring communities. So, Cache Creek is obviously not the same as Clinton, but geographically you're in similar places, and it is useful to see how you're doing in comparison to one another, rather than looking just at BC in general or just across the country of Canada, right? Under number 7, our approach. So we will be looking deeply at housing across the continuum, which is sort of emergency shelter housing on one end to market home ownership on the other, and everything in between, and there's a lot in between. We'll be looking at population trends, who's living in your communities. We're looking at how much does it cost to live in your communities, what makes Cache Creek a great place to live, and who might want to live here in the future. So all of those things are going into this approach, and as a big piece of this is significant engagement with the community and stakeholders. We know that census data and quantitative data in general is not incredibly reliable in small communities. Things change fast when they change, and a change that may be only a couple of families that are affected can actually have a really big impact on your community in general. So we know how important it is to be supplementing our quantitative data with qualitative engagement data from your community members. And there's a number of different ways that we'll be doing that, and I'll get to that in a little bit. A couple of deliverables and milestone dates on the next slide. The big one you need to know about is we're hoping to have everything wrapped up by the end of January. And that will include another visit to present to you the final findings and the final report, which you can then read into your minutes and publish on your website. And you'll also be getting, at the very end, we're doing a sort of instructional course for your staff who are interested. And that way, we're actually going to give you a data tool that you can then hopefully add in the next census data or next BC assessment data as it comes, rather than have to create the tool all over again. So.
Okay, just the housing report that you'll get in the end, it's something that the council will have to formally adopt by resolution, or not, hopefully yes, and then report that through. It'll also go through our board of directors, where your worship sits, and then it goes to the province for their sign off. So there's kind of a formal process for accepting it, and then it has to be posted on your website. So.
Okay, so that's sort of the project background. Any questions about sort of our approach or why we're doing this work, or was that there? Perfect. Okay, so now kind of the fun stuff. Let's look at some of our preliminary findings. Keeping in mind that this is so far just a data findings piece. We have not done significant engagement yet, and the limited engagement we have done, we've not been able to sort of put into a formal piece yet. So this is just looking at numbers, but those numbers do tell an interesting sort of narrative about your community and neighboring communities. So on page 10, what we've got here is the population of the different communities in the study, as well as the annual % change. You can see Cache Creek there is not the smallest community study by any means, but it's also not the largest one. Your population has decreased slightly every year, but a lot, as you can see there, most communities are moving up or down at plus or minus 1% annually. So really minimal change year to year. Over 5-year periods, it is looking like a smaller sort of decline in Clinton, in Cache Creek, but yeah, less than 1% a year is what it looks like, and that could change dramatically with a new industry coming to town or something like that, right? So, the big outlier there, you can tell, is Sun Peaks, how much it's sort of increasing year over year. Again, it's a newer community, so it's tough to judge it by the same metrics, right? And a very specific community. On to slide 11, we're looking at age distribution. So between 2006 and 2016, that 10-year period, your population declined about 6%. Your senior cohorts, so those are members of your community older than 65, actually increased, both in percentage and in real numbers, from 200 residents to 255 residents, whereas almost all other age cohorts fell. So looking at that largest piece there, the 25 to 64, went from 585 to about 540 residents. So, I think that's something that living here, is that your communities are aging, and thinking about how that impacts housing and what kind of housing you need to be attracting and encouraging in your community is really important. on slide 12, this is digging a little deeper into the senior population piece. Cache Creek has a higher proportion than both BC and the TNRD, but it is increasing at, actually, it says faster rate there, it's actually increasing at a slower rate. So you can see you're sort of increasing, the percent change between 06 and 2016 was between sort of 25 and 30%, whereas for British Columbia and the TNRD as a whole, those numbers are closer to that 40% range. So that's sort of interesting. Probably means your community started a little bit older, and now other communities are catching up. But definitely still skewing older with about currently almost 50% of your, or sorry, almost 25% of your population is over the age of 65. And again, BC and the TNRD are not perfect comparisons. Obviously, the TNRD includes a place like Kamloops, whereas BC includes Vancouver. So keeping in mind that these are just sort of directionality. It's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to just sort of point us in the right narrative direction. On to slide 13. One thing that is really interesting about your community is that about 12% of your community identifies as Indigenous on the census. So they're typically First Nations or Métis, and a big thing to look at, you can tell there, is that it's the younger cohorts that have a little more Indigenous people in them. So that 15 to 24 age range, 30% of your population identifies as Indigenous. Less so as you move older, and there's also a bit of data suppression in certain places. Census Canada, when there aren't enough residents in a certain category to make an accurate or they use the term data rigor, they suppress it, and that's because they don't want you to be able to go, oh, I know that person, who's the one Indigenous person who age 35, right? So that's why that they suppress those numbers. They also round numbers, so they would round up to either a 5 or down to a 5. So again, some numbers won't be perfect, but they can point us in the general direction. Moving on to number 14, this is primary maintainer age. We call the primary maintainer is the person in the household who is responsible for earning the majority of the income for the household. And what we're mapping here is the age of primary maintainers by the type of household they live in. So I think something that would make a lot of sense to folks is that those blue dots tend to start higher in the younger age ranges and then decrease in older age ranges. So you've got the 35 to 44 as the highest household size. That's because that's when people are most likely to have partners, children, things like that. So there's likely to be more people living in a home. As people get older, household size tends to decline as children move away, as people become single again after partners either move to a different housing situation or pass on. There's some data suppression for some of these as well, but that's generally what we're seeing is sort of mapping that expected lifestyle patterning. Okay, so that's sort of who's living in your community, but the demographic there. And the next piece is on housing stock and type. And it's always fun to do it in a place like Cache Creek, where like, you don't need me to tell you how many apartment buildings you have and that most of your community is single attached housing, but sometimes it's fun to look at it in comparison to some other jurisdictions. So on page 16 there, one thing that really jumps out is the housing stock in Cache Creek is much older than housing stock across the TNRD or in BC. About 75% of all of your housing was built before 1980, which is interesting, right? A huge chunk of it built between 61 and 80, which aligns with sort of industrial expansion and people moving here, right? Lots of times people look at that older housing stock figure and they go, like, that's a bit of a concern because those houses are maybe tougher to keep up, maybe they need updates to keep them warm in the winter time, maybe they need major repairs. And sometimes that's true, but we try to look at it as an asset. I think having that older housing stock makes your community special to live in, especially some of that housing stock that's sort of before 1960 that has a lot of character. And a lot of that housing stock built between 60 and 80 tends to be cheaper, tends to be built well, so some may need major repairs, but not all of it, and those that don't tend to be good for young families and tend to be built really well so they're not falling apart, right? So trying to think of it twisted into an asset and a way to meet your housing needs rather than a deficit is really important there. On the next one, looking at dwelling type, one thing that is really interesting in Cache Creek is that only about 50% of your units are single detached homes. And that is, I think, again, a really interesting asset that you have. About 12.5% of households are apartment households, and 22.5% are movable dwellings. So we have quite a large movable dwelling population. Some people tend to think that having a large movable dwelling stock is maybe not a good thing. I look at it as a really interesting and unique ownership option that's generally cheaper for folks, and a great place for a lot of folks to start their building equity towards maybe a larger home or things like that. So again, there's a tendency to think of these things as deficits, and I don't necessarily think that having a large stock of movable dwellings is a deficit at all. It might actually be a real asset for you. Again, thinking of the TNRD as including Kamloops, which does have a lot of apartment buildings, so it's not a perfect comparison, but you do have less single detached homes than most of the similar communities in the region, which I think is really, really interesting. The next slide, 18, is just showing when those homes were built. So you're looking at, the earlier homes tended to be the single detached types, and then between 80 and 90, we saw a big jump in the movable dwellings as well as some apartment structures being built. And then later on, we're seeing more single detached again, and just mostly movable dwellings. And then now we're getting into who is living in your community. And a big piece of it is how much money folks are making, because that really determines what type of housing they can access. And is the housing pricing matching up with the type of income people are earning? So on slide 20, we're looking at households by tenure type. On the left, you've got your owners, and on the right, you've got your renters. About 21% of Cache Creek rents. 26% of renters are families with children, and 63% of renters are singles or roommates. Those are called non-census families, and it can be folks who are young and single and don't have a partner or don't have someone that they live with in a financial relationship. It can also be older folks who maybe have lost a partner and are now living on their own again. For owners, we're seeing about 41% of your owners are families with children, so those can be older retirees who no longer have children living in their home, or they can be younger couples. And then again, about 26% also families with children. So interesting that a similar percentage in each are families with children. 21, again, this is that same primary household maintainer, but this time we're looking at by rates of rentership. So what you can see in the green there, the green is the number of renters. So you see the most renters happening when the primary maintainer is younger, so 15 to 24, and steadily decreasing as folks get older. And then in the 75 to 85 plus categories, very few renters. There probably are a few, but likely that's been suppressed due to Census Canada suppression. You can probably think of someone in that age category who might rent, so that lots of times the data doesn't match up with what your sort of experiences in your community, and largely that's because of suppression and grounding. Yeah, limited renters in the 45 plus cohorts. And now it gets really interesting. So this next slide, 22, is looking at incomes in Cache Creek, and we're breaking out owner incomes and renter incomes. So Cache Creek actually has a lower median income than the Thompson-Nicola Regional District and British Columbia, but it is generally close to some of your neighboring communities, so I wouldn't say that it is lower than expected. But a big thing is the disparity between owner incomes and renter incomes. Owners tend to earn a median owner income, so half people make more than this and half households make less than this, is about $65,000 a year, whereas an owner median income is less than $30,000 a year. Incomes across Cache Creek are actually growing at a slightly faster rate than in BC and the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, which is a good sign. But yeah, that disparity between owner incomes and renter incomes is a bit concerning. And some people say that, well, that's because renters tend to rent because they earn less, and maybe as they earn more, they'll be able to buy. And that is true. But what we're seeing across the province and across the country is that more and more people are renting at higher frequencies, and they're staying renting because ownership is out of reach for a lot of people. So that's something to just keep in mind as we move forward. And then this last one on 23 is on the low income measure. In Canada, we don't have a poverty line like they would in the United States. We certainly don't use that language, but this low income measure is sort of is what we kind of have as our comparison. In Cache Creek, you are looking at about 26.9% of, it's about 20% overall living in the low income measure. And those rates tend to be higher with families who have younger children than a household. So the blue bar that says 26.9, that's households with someone 0 to 17 in them. And then digging more deeply into households with someone who's actually 0 to 5, so parents with very young children, the number is about 25% of households below the low income measure. So again, another sort of indicator of who might be struggling to meet their housing needs in your community, or those families, or folks who are below the low income measure. And then the last sort of section here we'll touch on is on housing need. So on page 25, we've got basically 3 need criteria. We talk about adequacy. So on the short form census that everyone has to fill out, you're asked, is your house in need of major repairs, yes or no? So it is a bit subjective, so if your house is in need of major repairs, you're considered to be in an inadequate housing situation. So that's one of our need criteria. The second one is suitability. Basically, it's do you have enough bedrooms for the number of people who live in your household and for the composition of that household. So if you have 4 kids with differing genders, they've got a formula that matches up the people in your household with the number of bedrooms that says whether or not there are enough. And if you aren't deemed to have enough bedrooms, then you're considered in unsuitable housing. That's the second one. And the last one is affordability. We use a standardized metric to judge affordability. It's the shelter cost to income ratio, and that means are you spending, if you're spending more than 30% of your gross income on shelter costs, then you're considered to be in an unaffordable housing situation. And if you meet any one of those 3, you're considered in something called core housing need. So on page 26, we're looking at core housing needs. Cache Creek is relatively in line with the regional district as a whole, and even slightly lower in some cases than British Columbia as a whole. So about 9.5% of your households are in core housing need. Only about 2.7% of your owners, but nearly a third of your renters are in core housing need, which is, as you can see across the regional district, that's the case as well. So it gives you a real idea of who is struggling in your community. It's largely renters. And then what we do on the next one is we actually bump that. We take that 30% figure, we make it 50%. We call that extreme core housing needs. And we consider it extreme because if you're paying more than 50% of your income on housing and shelter costs, you are one unexpected expense away from having to choose between your rent, your power, food, etc. So you're considered in a very tenuous housing situation. And in Cache Creek, only about 5% of your households are in extreme core housing needs, but almost 24% of your renters are still in extreme core housing needs. So not a large disparity between the regular core and extreme core when it comes to your renting population. And as you can see, sort of your total population does match up with the regional district as a whole, but it's disproportionately, that sort of situation is disproportionately felt by renters in Cache Creek. And that's sort of it for the preliminary data. The last couple things on next steps on 29 there is we're going to be doing more in-depth analysis of this data and looking for data relationships. So we'll be pulling information on from BC Assessment on how much your housing costs. We'll be matching that up with what most people can afford in your community. And we'll be developing a preliminary report that will be coming pretty soon. But the big next piece for us is our engagement. So we've already started doing key forum interviews with important housing stakeholders in a lot of different communities. We'll be hosting some focus groups, and we'll be being in touch with your CAO about that, about potentially participating, or if he's got some suggestions for people who might want to participate from the community. You've already sent me a list of folks, I recall, so we're working through that.
Which I got primarily from the seniors housing needs that we did a couple of years ago.
Perfect, yeah. And then a big thing that's coming down the pipe, hopefully this week, is we're launching a survey for just the general public to fill out. So we'll be sure to send along the link as soon as we have it, and if you can promote it through your networks, or if you know secret Facebook groups that I won't have access to, I know that there always are them, so yeah, if you can add it to there, that would be great. Maybe what we'll do is have the communications at TNRD actually put together like a little image or something that you can drop easily into those Facebook groups. That would be great. And then report writing, and then we'll be back in January to do a final council presentation. I think that's it. Any questions at all? I know it's a lot to throw at you in 20-minute sitting, but.
So those metrics were provided by Stats Canada, or how were?
Variety of sources, yeah. The main one is Statistics Canada, for sure. They administer the census, and they hold the majority of that data. But BC Statistics purchased a custom data set from StatsCan, so we actually have access to a few unique metrics that wouldn't be readily available on the Stats Canada website. We've also got information from BC Assessment, so they will be giving us assessment values for the homes in Cache Creek. And we've pulled some data from some private data firms as well. So there are companies that specialize in their own metrics and predictions using the publicly available data to create new sort of private data that people can pay for. And as well, there's a company that it mines websites like Airbnb for all the different metrics related to short-term rentals, which is a bigger deal in some communities than in others. But we bought it all, so we got it, and what we have we'll be sharing with you as well. So there's a lot of different data sources. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much for all of those numerous stats that we can look back on and see where we're at with our needs assessment, housing needs assessment. And thank you for taking the time to come and present to us. It's very valuable information and one in our community when we hope to change those numbers in positive ways in the next 5 years. So thank you.
So this report is the report that BC Housing, if there's any applications for whether it's to support rental housing or seniors, that is the data that they're going to want to get from you. So Sandy will be providing it in a template form, and I hope whoever, is it you, Martin?
Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll find somebody to delegate it that can come to the training, because one of the things that's been raised is the census, because we're dealing with 2016 census. The 2021 census comes out in 2022, so by the end of 2022, 23, especially if you're going to be, you've got land and you want to approach BC Housing for some sort of a development, update that data and make your argument.
Yes, that's what we're hoping to do.
And if you have any questions at all moving forward, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll leave a couple of cards with Martin, and we can straighten them afterwards.
Yes.
You have this.
Thank you.
Actually, there's more sitting out on the printer.
When we send you the link, it would be good, because I don't want TNRD logo all over it, because that would confuse matters. I'm just thinking about that. Like on our website, it should have the TNRD link for the rural areas, because we're doing the electoral areas, and they'll have a separate report. Although we work regionally, like sometimes if you're in, well, Ashcroft's already done, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to look at you. You're a reporter now. Ashcroft's already done their report. Of course, there's people living in and around Cache Creek and Ashcroft, so.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We read your report.
Thank you. What's that?
We read your report.
Oh, good.
They were the first out of the gate.
Oh, okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank
you for coming.
Well,
Have a good meeting.
Thank
See
you.
you Thursday.
Yes.
We'll get to meet you soon. You bet. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
As your work, Councillor Defoe is away this evening. Just give an update on that. So recommendation that we adopt regular council meeting minutes held on August 17, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
I do. On the minutes to amend on page 3 and 4, that, where am I here? Okay. Councillor Pittman responded that this is actually where the change needs to be, that she made it very clear and stated that she was calling as a business owner and taxpayer, not as a counselor, and stated that the CFO Martini was being very rude and unprofessional for the position that she is in.
And we can look at that through the tape. Thank you. Anything further? Thank you. Move to adopt the minutes. All in favor? Carried. And Clean Renewable Energy Infrastructure Grant. Perhaps, well, between myself and CFO Martini, we met.
There's the August 31st special council meeting minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, my apologies. I am on the wrong page, so my apologies.
You're not gonna get out of here that fast.
Yeah, no, I'm flipping back and forth through notes. That the minutes of the special council meeting held on August 31st, 2020 be adopted as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Business arising from delegations that we direct administration to send a thank you letter to Mr. McKay and Ms. Sat
It would be for
Delikova.
his presentation, not her presentation.
Oopsie.
So
That's where,
moved.
that's where all the millions of times you've corrected me.
To include Regina as well in that, in the thank you?
Yes.
Okay. So moved.
Second. Discussion. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Business arising from the minutes.
Sorry, I was too busy making the changes to the resolution. Who moved and seconded?
Right.
I moved. Santa second.
Okay.
Business arising from the minutes, we adopt the 2020 annual report for the year 2019.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Sorry, were you seconding or calling for a second?
No, I called it for a second.
Oh.
I was, okay. Yeah. Oh, discussion.
Just that we have clarification on those items, and that it sounds like that it'll be changed for the actual presentation of the final report.
Yes, well, the report that was on the annual report included the statements, the financial statements that have already been adopted and sent into the province. So the changes that you see there will be for next year's,
Oh, okay.
for the 2020 audit.
Okay.
That we'll do next year. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Economic Development, Councillor Peters and Councillor Coomber. Anything?
I don't believe I have anything, no.
Okay. Budget and Administrative Services.
First I'll let you know the results of a meeting that Councillor Peters and I had with two members of the BC Interior Community Foundation. We met with Hugh and Rob back in August, late August. So some of the questions that have come up, we relayed the questions to them and the answers. The village doesn't have to set up its own foundation. It will be managed through the BC Interior Community Foundation. It's an endowed fund because of NDIT's grant. They told us that in their eyes, the village is the charitable organization. It's the one registered with CRA, so we set up a structured fund. Once we have the money, we can give it to whomever. But having a list of requirements will ensure continuity down the line. There is a letter of agreement contained in this package that I hope we can approve. So we can work on the details even after the letter of agreement is signed. Once signed, it usually takes up to 6 months to complete the paperwork. Logan Lake, Lytton, and Lillooet already have funds through the Interior Community Foundation. Lillooet has a public committee that accepts applications and makes recommendations to council about who receives grants. And in some cases, it just goes directly to council, who hands out the money to people who do groups that apply. So they send a lump sum of money to the municipalities. Once the money is in their hands, that's the end of it. Council can either direct expenditures or a committee can direct them. So the administration cost is 1% and it comes from revenue generated by the principal. They told us that by law they have to guarantee a 3.5% return, which seems pretty good in this day and age of interest. They issue reports and I believe audited statements once a year. And requesting the money from them, the funding, all it takes is a letter or an email. And they advised us that, although we can take money out of the foundation, it should remain in there as long as we can leave it so that the interest can be maximized. And if we decide on a committee, it should be, you explain that one, because I can't read your handwriting.
They suggested to have a committee, that you would have a committee of council, so there would be 1 or 2 council members on the committee, have a business rep, a service group rep, and 1 or more members of the public to comprise the committee. That committee then would take the applications and make recommendations to council for dispersion of funds. So that it wouldn't, and that's our choice when we flesh out our policy on it. Whether it would be done by council or whether it would be done by committee, but those are all things that would be determined when we set up the policy.
Mm-hmm. So
Pretty sure that would have to be by bylaw, not policy.
Or by bylaw, well, yeah. However that it's set up, that those things can be fleshed out. The first step is what we're presenting tonight, is the letter of agreement with BC Interior Community Foundation. The conversations we had with them made me feel a lot more comfortable about the whole thing, because I foresaw it taking forever if we had to set up our own foundation, whereas they manage. There's actually some pamphlets on the table over there that shows some of the list of groups and its pages that they represent with this foundation. So it's a very stable, viable group.
They made it clear to us that they are the foundation. We're not. They are the foundation.
Yeah.
We are the fund.
Yeah.
And because they see the village as the charitable organization with the CRA number, once the village has it, it can go wherever we choose, to individuals, to community groups, to bursaries, what we've talked about in the past.
CAO.
Okay, so you were saying that they have to guarantee a minimum rate of return of 3.5%?
3.5.
And does their 1% come out of that 3.5? So we would see a minimum of 2.5% return.
And if interest rates go higher, then we would get higher. They
Right.
just can't go below, they have to give us
Oh.
that 3.5% less than 1%.
So,
So 2.5%.
So if we have $100,000 in their fund, then we should be guaranteed to make at least $2,500 a year in interest.
Mhm.
Okay.
But how can they guarantee that in such economic climate?
They're required by law.
Oh,
They tell us they have some pretty good investments.
Yeah.
But
in that case.
there was a hold on that for how many years? You reported in a previous meeting that we weren't able to access that interest for 5 years.
It's as soon as there's interest generated,
Yeah.
we can
Not our
borrow.
understanding at all.
Yeah, it's the principal that can't be touched.
We
The
can-
interest. the
It's
interest can-
permanent.
It's permanent,
Yeah.
yeah. It's an endowment to the BC Interior Community Foundation.
So they would be able to access the 2,500 right away?
The following
For
year.
The following year.
1 year?
Yeah, because
1
it has
year.
to have the
Yeah.
time to earn that interest.
And it's also open to donations, if we want to have fundraisers, or if people just want to donate on behalf of themselves or some cause. That would add to our fund and add to the interest generated as well.
I think the reason they can guarantee such a high rate is that they manage the funds for so many, like, it's a pretty substantial amount of money that they're managing, and therefore they have negotiating power and interest rates. Whereas us, if we had $100,000, would have far less negotiating power with interest rates.
Well, and we're very, very restricted as to what we can invest in.
Yeah.
Well, the village of Ashcroft and Cache Creek already have access to these funds, so
No.
they can apply for, the
No.
nonprofit groups
Cache
can
Creek.
apply for it.
Nonprofit groups may be able
Yes.
to, but there's certain criteria with them. We don't, the village of Cache Creek at this point in time does not have an investment with them.
No, but our local organizations can apply to the BC.
If they meet the criteria.
Yeah, nonprofit
Well,
organizations.
depends on.
That's what we're looking at right now, right? For our own.
Yeah, but their application process, each fund has its own criteria,
Right.
and whomever is applying for those funds has to, what they need the funds for have to meet those criteria.
Right.
And that's what we would set as our fund would have our criteria.
Different
That's-
criteria.
Well, whatever we choose them to be.
And
So-
it wouldn't have to be just groups, it could be individuals, it could be anomalies like the drag racers. It could be bursaries for our kids graduating from high school.
Thank you for that report, both of you, thank you. We'll call the question that we approve signing the letter of agreement.
Before we do that, I'd just like to talk about this one area in the letter. Third line, it says, supporting organizations in the village and area. I'd rather take "and area" out. I would like to see this fund strictly for Cache Creek. We could fund activities or services that are for Cache Creek, but area leaves it wide open to applications from people and groups that we never really set it up for.
True. However, if there's a particular group that might be associated with the municipality that is in another area, we ultimately will make the decision on whether we approve those funds or not. So having that terminology in there actually restricts us somewhat, a great deal
But
actually.
not if you consider activities or services held in Cache Creek. That could be from
For
outdoor,
benefit.
for the
Of
benefit of the
benefit to
Cache
the
Creek.
residents of Cache Creek.
I mean, that could
Okay,
be,
but it still restricts us somewhat.
I think the intent of and area is that it might be a service group or that's not necessarily based in Cache Creek, but they serve the residents of Cache Creek. I can use Lions Club for an example. Our mandate is we have to use any funds raised by the Ashcrofton District Lions Club have to be used within the community or for the benefit of the community. So that could be how it's better.
Just using the Lions as an example, it's.
Sorry, that's the only point of reference I have.
Yeah,
so-
but I mean, are all of your members within the boundaries of Cache Creek?
No, it's the Ashcroft and District Lions
That's
Club.
what I thought.
Yeah.
So this, if you leave it as just in the village end sentence, then the Lions wouldn't be eligible because they have members that are from outside the village.
It restricts us somewhat, and we ultimately have the control of where that funding goes when an application comes in. So I would not be in favor of taking that terminology out of there.
I just think it's a disservice to people in Cache Creek who are using their money for this.
Maybe or maybe not. I beg to disagree, but
Would changing the wording to and supporting organizations in the village or organizations that would benefit the citizens of the village?
this is a
Something along that.
well-respected community
Yeah.
foundation who has done this many, many, many times. We're picking apart one little thing that could restrict us in the future in how we disperse the funding. They are the experts. This is the cover letter that they're asking us, or the agreement they're asking us to sign as a municipality. Ultimately, we have the control of either saying yea or nay to the funding, and I think it would be, I don't think, I know it would be an issue. We'll be revisiting in the future.
And those-
They put this wording in just because they thought that that's what we were telling them at the meeting that we had with them.
I think those kinds of things can be,
Once it's in the letter of agreement, it's in the letter of
but the
agreement.
committee.
That's right.
The committee or council decides who's getting that funding, so that if they don't think that it benefits the
Well-
village, then they vote no.
That it,
They don't recommend it.
any further discussion? I'll call the
Well,
question.
I just thought the whole idea was to eliminate so much of the administration.
That's what it's doing. Let's call the question.
So now it sounds like there's a lot more.
Well, no,
Oh, there
there-
always is when you're giving out money, it's never free.
Do we have a motion?
Manpower.
Council approved assigning the letter of agreement.
so moved.
Oh, or second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Opposed.
Council approved applying for NDIT funding of $50,000 towards the community foundation.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion on that matter? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Opposed.
Clean Renewable Energy Infrastructure grants. Did you want to deal with this
Yeah,
one, Christina?
I would like
Please.
to talk about that. It's, there are two grants, but I'm not saying to apply to both grants, but there are grants available out there, and I thought that maybe going towards becoming more sustainable is not a bad idea. I prepared a schedule showing just the hydro bill the last 2 years, how big was for the community. If we could go for solar panel, on our infrastructure, on our assets, and just cut down on that bill, is money in our pockets that we could do something else. So I thought maybe it's a good idea to apply for one of those grants and see whichever comes first, and we'll do something. So maybe some feasibility study and a demo center for solar panels and just send out a request for proposal, see who comes in willing to help us with that.
It's clear that we're going to see dramatic changes in the industry in the next 1 to 5 years from what I got from the engineer that we met with, Mr. Gutisi, if I remember correctly. And a pilot project or feasibility study coupled with a pilot project would make a lot of sense for us to pursue, especially based on the recommendations that we have before us. And so if we can move the recommendation and carry on.
So moved.
Second. Discussion.
Where would we be looking at possibly for the solar panels?
Well, that's why the study is going to be conducted first, and then based on the recommendation the engineers are going to give us, we are going to build a demo center in a location that is probably most suitable.
Okay. Do you have any idea of the areas that were, like the different buildings that are using more power?
Well, I could probably get some more information, but with the buildings, it all depends on the age of the structure. The feasibility study is going to probably look at the roof and how structurally sound is that roof in order to build the panels. Also the electrical system, if it's a new one, an old one, depends on how the transfer of energy is going to flow in and out. So that's why the feasibility study comes first. I cannot make a recommendation because I'm not an electrical engineer, but that's why the study will clarify.
CEO Wilson?
The two buildings that use the most electricity in the village are the water treatment plant and the sewer treatment plant.
Any
My
further
guess would be the water treatment plant would be the higher of the two.
Okay.
further discussion? All in favor? Carried. And recommendation, the second recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Carried. Item 3, a tax reminder letter. Councillor Pittman to supply us with her copy that states that it's different from any of the others.
Okay, so the issue on this whole situation was on a phone call.
Well, just, let's
Just,
stick.
no,
We are
because I
sticking
waited,
Tax
I
reminder,
waited,
let's see the tax reminder letter. This is what we're dealing with right now. The
I
one that
waited.
that stipulates is different than that was sent out to anybody else. So that's what we're talking about right now.
I wasn't given the opportunity to speak the first time around. And that's why I'm speaking now.
It's on tape that you did speak. And actually,
And
you
so,
did call
so
our
far
CFO a liar.
So far, yes, I did, because that was in regards to the phone call and how the conduct of the phone call.
Right.
Yeah,
And
you have
that's
used a
why-
very colorful
that's
language that
why-
is unacceptable, even if you're
That
just a
is
taxpayer.
why-
The
that-
question from me was
My issue was,
that you are to produce the letter that states
I did,
that
right
you've
here.
got something different than all the other taxpayers received that had a tax reminder notice.
That's,
So if you could produce that, that'll
it's
get us
right
to.
here.
Oh, okay.
And it not anywhere on here does it say that it's a friendly reminder that your taxes are
Is
due
it
until
different from
September the
anybody
30th.
else that got the letter?
May I see it?
When this is the letters that I received.
That's what I'm asking you. Is it different than all the rest? And you had a copy of that letter the last meeting.
At that meeting, it stated that outstanding taxes. It was just a friendly reminder that your taxes are due on or before
Yep.
September 30th. That's not what the letter, my letter states.
The first line of your letter says,
It
please
says
note that
a
this letter
reminder.
serves as a reminder.
But it doesn't state on there about it being due on September 30th.
It's just reminding
2020.
you that your
It's a
taxes
reminder.
are due.
No, it reminds that the taxes are outstanding.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
the exact same letter that
So
everyone else got.
the taxes aren't outstanding until October the 1st.
No, the taxes
Outstanding
are
means they
outstanding
haven't been
since
paid.
they have been issued.
Right.
Overdue means they are overdue, which is not the case.
Outstanding just means that they are due to be paid by the deadline.
So if you could produce
The
a letter that's
issue-
different than
the
anybody else
issue-
got.
Was that when it was brought forward under new business, it was an issue that the CFO had an issue that was bothering her, that Councillor Pittman had called insulting, demeaning, condescending, out of line, not acceptable, and will hang up.
That's exactly what
Now,
the phone call was.
And you also added in there that your command of English language doesn't have the understanding between outstanding and arrears.
We're gonna
That's
call.
Now,
exactly
then,
it.
where is
Just
it
made the
condescending and insulting?
1 second. You were produced the letter that states that that letter was different than anybody else in the community got. Now, can you provide that letter?
The
What
issue,
don't you understand?
the issue was not the letter. The letter was irrelevant.
Look
It
it.
was about the
Look
phone
it.
call. And
The,
that,
I
you
specifically
haven't
asked
given
you.
me, you haven't
you
given me the opportunity
Okay, I'm
to
gonna give
clear
you
that,
2
and
minutes.
now I have
Give me-
cleared that.
Give me the
So
2,
that
you
is
have
it.
2 minutes to clear it. Produce that letter.
Why-
That you
It's
said
not
that
a-
Christina
it's not-
gave you that was different than anybody's else. Give us the proof.
During that time,
Referring to page 3, new business, item B, August 17th, 2020, adopted council minutes. The minutes reflect discussions between Councillor Pittman and CFO Martini regarding the mailed out property tax notice reminder. It's disturbing and frankly unacceptable for a councillor to degrade, humiliate, and insinuate CFO Martini is a
and
liar.
also,
I've expressed to this
And
council how
also-
inadequate code of conduct can be and how the lack of quick and decisive action that requires in some cases is non-existent. As such, as mayor, I'm rescinding Councillor Pittman's acting mayor appointment from the term of December 2020 through December 2021.
you were going to do that
CFO
anyway.
Martini, this council is painfully aware of the challenges you and the finance committee face in our community. Expressing our gratitude on behalf of the citizens of which you serve for your efforts is in deciphering years of financial records and putting the integrity of our municipality at a level which hasn't been reached in many years is underestimated. So for that, we thank you.
Thank you.
And
And I want to
I'm not
make
gonna
it clear
apologize for this
that
person's
that
behavior.
I spoke to
Carry on.
the CFO as a business owner and a taxpayer of Cache Creek.
Policy and
I was
bylaw
not
review.
representing as Cache Creek as a counselor when
Mayor
that phone
Talerico
call.
and Councilor
It was
Peters.
very
Asked
unprofessional
asked
of you.
and answered, move on.
Disgrace.
You are. And that's why you're,
That's right, I understand exactly. That's why you can't produce a letter.
it wasn't about the
Designate
letter, it
Mayor
was
Talerico.
irrelevant
It
about the
was.
letter.
You
The
said you
letter-
It's right
It was
on the
an
minutes.
issue.
You
The-
said that
the
your
new
letter did
business
not say it
came
was
up,
a
And
reminder.
it was an issue that was bothering her. That was the phone call, and that is what I was calling.
Yes, the
When you asked if
Asked
I was
asked and
reminded,
answered,
yes.
I'd like
Once
to call a
again, I'm
point
going
of
to
order,
say-
this has been asked and answered, we need to move on.
Designated spokesperson for Canada's legislation project.
Do you need one? I'm happy to talk about it.
Absolutely.
That was gonna be my
Well,
suggestion.
let's make a motion, the council appoint a single council representative.
I move that Councillor Coomber be appointed as our representative to act as a spokesperson for the cannabis legislation project.
Can I second?
Do you have a second? I'll second that. Discussion.
Is there a need for one? But normally the CAO or the mayor normally handles any media and public inquiries.
If I may, the consultant asked for one staff member and one council member. Did not specify the mayor. I have put I am going to be the contact on staff. We now have a motion on the floor to appoint Councillor Coomber as the spokesperson from council.
I'll just add that I didn't realize that Martin was also a spokesperson, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, I'll throw my name in there as
It's
well.
in the preamble paragraph, for council's information, the CAO will act as staff representative.
Okay, I should read it. I don't mind.
I would like to throw my name in there as well. I'll be their spokesman if council wishes.
The committee that has been dealing with that is actually Mayor Tellerico and myself, so
Thank you.
Mayor Tellerico might be a better person to be the spokesperson. Oh,
I'll accept.
Is that Councillor Coomber and Mayor Tellerico?
No.
Or just Mayor Tellerico?
Myself.
There was a motion on the
So
floor.
the motion on the floor is to appoint Councillor Coomber.
Motion is to appoint council representative to act as a
no,
spokesman.
the motion was for Councillor Coomber.
Who made the motion?
I did,
You second.
and you seconded. And then we went to discussion, so.
Okay.
So we vote and defeat it and then change it.
Sure.
So you'll have to call a question on the
Question.
current motion?
Absolutely. Question is called. All in favor? Of rescinding?
No, no,
No, of the
No.
motion on the floor.
so we just
No,
vote.
okay.
Yeah.
We don't vote.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Now a motion is needed
Well,
to,
we've only called for those in favor, we haven't called the result.
Oh.
Anyone opposed yet.
All in favor? We've done that already.
That, but we
No,
have not asked for any opposed, and then,
Opposed?
very good.
New motion.
Oh, what the heck?
motion to appoint the mayor as the representative to act as spokesperson for the cannabis legislation project.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Guess it's a carry.
All in favor?
Was that a unanimous?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, on to number 2, policy and bylaw review. Myself and Councillor Peters, did you want to take that one on? Councillor Peters?
I move that we pass that we keep council meetings closed to the public as number 1, Cache Creek Village Council chambers are not large enough to allow for proper distancing, and moving meetings to the community hall would be cost prohibitive. And number 2, meetings will continue to be recorded and broadcast by the Hub Online Network. Case-by-case requests by members of the public to attend will be considered. Thank you for putting that in.
Did you move that?
I did.
Second? Yeah. Discussion? All in favor?
I would like to see a timeline for when this,
I don't think we can set a timeline
like,
because.
or
it's
an
fluid.
idea of stating that when the rest of the crew goes
I
back,
think
or
that-
when the
correct-
COVID is.
Correct me if I'm
virus is-
wrong, but would the ministerial order not be changed at that time?
Yes,
We
what
would be
the
mandated
the
to go
ministerial
back to
order would
normal.
be withdrawn when the
Yeah.
state of emergency for the province is
So we would have to go back to regular
Exactly.
procedures.
So this isn't forever.
No. Oh, no. This is just during the
Well, because
pandemic.
Yeah, and so we have safety meetings and the emergency flood meetings at the community hall, so I don't see where the cost.
Those aren't open to the
prohibitive.
public.
Question, all in favor? Go ahead, Martin.
I just wanted to clarify, the reason for the cost, prohibitive cost, is that when it's open to the public, you have to get contact tracing information. So you'll have to have a staff person there taking names and contact information at the door. You would have to keep that information on file. You have to do extra cleaning afterward. It adds a substantial cost,
You have to make sure everyone's distanced.
that as well,
You have to clean extra.
which is what I meant there, yes.
All in favor? Carried, thank you.
Opposed.
Procedure bylaw number 818. That staff be directed to make changes to the draft procedure.
So moved.
Second, discussion.
If I may, the document you see there is Councilor Coomber's and mine, although several of mine were based on conversations that were held with all of council. The reason for it being on the agenda for tonight is to find out if there are any other changes that council wants to make, or if the change, there are some here that are either or, do we want to do this or not? So I need that feedback tonight so that we can bring in a completed bylaw back to the next meeting.
I sent out an email today requesting, if possible, and the council can consider the meetings that start at 7 o'clock to start a bit earlier, because I run into a situation where the meeting ended at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then I was stuck behind the trucks and got home after midnight, and it's just probably not very feasible for me, you know, spending 14 hours a day and then not being able to get home until after midnight. It's pretty tough, especially in the winter at minus 18 degrees.
I think the reason for the 7 PM is to accommodate the, I would assume, I don't know this.
The media.
Yeah, the media is part of it at this particular point in time, but I think was to accommodate counselors who are employed and have to make special arrangements to be here for 4:30 meetings. Whereas a 7 o'clock meeting is after work hours, and it also for the public as well, so that it opens it up.
But it's not necessarily to be 7, maybe even just 6 o'clock, even 1 hour, it will make a big difference.
It's
Anyway,
to,
it's just for consideration.
are we having additional July and August meetings? Are we putting those back, or are we just
That's a
doing one and
proposal.
one?
That's the
That's one of
proposal.
the queries that I added there.
Because I thought that was due to staff having their vacation times during the summer.
That was one of the reasons. Also, there tends to be less business over the summer. There used to be a tendency that there was less business over the summer. That seems to be changing. And that's why it has come up in conversation, informal conversation with several members of council, that we perhaps want to look at having 2 meetings for July and August. There would be impacts, yes, because that is when most people take vacation.
Right.
And there may be one member of senior staff that would not attend one of those 2 meetings. We would schedule so that there would always be at least one of the senior staff present, though.
And that would add to the workload for the clerks in the office?
Well, obviously, there'd be another agenda and another set of minutes to be done, yes, so there would be some workload increase.
The other thing I have is, can we add the that one line, the village's social media accounts and dedicated website, to 8B. 11B, C, E.
Sorry, what are you asking?
The underlined bold section under 8AI,
Mm-hmm.
the village's social media accounts and dedicated website. Councillor Pittman is asking that you added to 8B and 11.
B, C, and E.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That makes sense, yes.
I think that's it for me.
Anything further?
Just on the, at the bottom of page 28, there's an exchange between Councillor Coomber and myself about the Emergency Management Select Committee. That committee was established to try to form a local emergency preparedness committee. Right now, we do have a Protective Services Committee to look after other functions related to protective services. I just wanted to remind council of what I said in my comments there. If you do want to have a standing committee that looks after everything to do with emergency management, council is quite capable of setting up that committee, or actually I believe the mayor has the authority to do so. And the Protective Service Committee would be looking after fire department, ambulance, healthcare, that kind of thing. Obviously, that would be a council decision, or to make a recommendation to the mayor to call it, to make that select committee into a standing committee. But there are other options other than what I put in paper, in writing there. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Any further?
If there are no other changes, I will put together a draft and try to circulate it to council later on this week, so that you have a preliminary view at it, one last kick at the can before making any other changes before I put it on the next agenda.
All in favor?
Excuse me, I didn't get the seconder on that, I don't think.
Did I can second if nobody else did.
Okay, I've got Councillor Peters making the motion.
Second.
Okay.
Public Works and Community Facilities. Myself and Councillor Defoe, who isn't here. There were recommendations to direct staff to pursue an agreement with Ministry MOTI regarding construction of East Trans-Canada Bridge.
Second.
Discussion?
Has this been started, or is this the very start of this?
No.
Excuse me, I'm just to make the
Consent.
Okay. What they have done so far is done a preliminary site assessment.
No, the Modi part of it.
Oh, the Modi part of it. I have touched base with them. I was originally under the impression that we would have to get a crown land lease because it is Ministry of Transportation right away, but there's another process that's not nearly as onerous. It's some kind of I think they call it an access agreement, which I will follow up on as soon as I possibly can here, because that project is being delayed for one reason or another.
Would have been in the works already.
Yeah, there's already been delayed because of there's a need for a more comprehensive Section 11 application. There's now a need for a more comprehensive archaeological assessment. And my understanding, although I have not heard any details, they did find something of archaeological, I don't know how significant, but they did find something over and above just normal, what they
To
scattered.
delay it.
Was it a fish?
Yeah.
I don't know what.
That would be an artifact on cash credit.
I guess that's more of just a heads up for council and the public that the bridge very likely will not be tendered this year. It'll probably be next year.
Well, there's still hope. There's still hope.
Any further
You
discussion?
believe in unicorns?
All in
don't
favor?
you?
Carried, thank you. Village Services and Liaison. Councilor Coomber.
Don't have anything to report because after the summer, things are finally starting to get moving again, so all of my meetings are this week.
Thank you. Protective Services, myself and Councilor Coomber. Request for donation.
I'll move.
Second. Discussion. All in favor?
Are they gonna do the Halloween thing?
Yes.
That's what this is for.
Are they going to?
Yep.
Make sure they shoot it at my backyard because it's drier than love.
Well,
Pass.
they have people that are running around and that's their job, is to just put stuff out.
Question?
Oh, that was Smokey the Bear.
It's passed already. Mr. Gudinski and Mr. Fitzgerald were honored yesterday during the dinner at the fire hall for their years of service. And we thank them both for being members of our fire department for many years. And they've both moved on out of town.
Sorry, I'll get the names off the tape, never mind.
Ed Gudinski and
Dale Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald.
Under governmental relations, myself and Councilor Coomber. Councilor Coomber, do you have something to report?
Yes. This morning, we had our first ministerial meeting with Minister Claire Trevina, Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. And we had I was joined by Councillor Peters and CAO Dawson, and we had two concerns to bring up to her and her staff. The first being a bridge to replace the culvert on Highway 97. And we mentioned the daylighting idea, the need to give the creek lots of room to move so it wouldn't keep compromising our roads and property. And her response was,
They'll monitor.
yeah, they'll monitor it.
And investigate alternatives, that's what
Yeah. We told her that raising the highway 1 meter just to put in a bridge was unacceptable because of all of the businesses that we have right there. The Subway, Dairy Queen, Annie's, even the school, even the intersection for that matter would have an elevation change. So I don't think they really thought that was important. But that was just my impression.
It's climate change standards, apparently. I'm not sure how that
Yes.
climate change works into that, but
And they have to follow the rules. Yeah. We mentioned that the creek breached that culvert by Dairy Queen in 2015, 17, 18, and almost again this year. Culverts weren't doing it, but she was adamant that if they put a bridge in there, they would have to follow the climate change standards and raise it to unreasonable heights. The second concern that we brought up to her was the 4-laning of the North End Bridge. That it was a bottleneck for traffic, that especially during the summer, we had all sorts of traffic on it coming into town, and all of a sudden, after a 2-lane bridge, they had 4 lanes in all directions, but, yeah. They thought that it was a really good bridge and we didn't need to change it, not for at least 10 years, they weren't even going to look at it. But she said they could possibly relocate that sewer line.
Or help us with the relocation.
Yeah. CAO Dawson had a really good question. He asked if her ministry could provide us with a draft of what a 4-lane bridge would look like there, just so we could pass it on to our engineers and they could look at it for relocating that line, but.
Her answer was, it's a really good bridge.
Yeah, I said, it is a really good bridge, it's just too small.
And when I challenged and said, does that mean that the 4-laning north of Cache Creek is not gonna happen for at least 10 years? Her answer was, it's a really good bridge.
Yeah.
So, short answer is no, they're not going to do the 4-laning anytime in the future for us, which
Yes.
is really unfortunate.
Well, I mentioned that we were promised this with the Gordon Campbell administration in 2005, but also in 2017 in the fall, Modi had discussed this with us, but yeah, she wasn't going to be stuck on what other governments promised us.
It was a really good bridge.
Yeah, because it's a really good bridge.
That was pretty much our constant answer.
So, on Friday, we talked to Minister Doug Donaldson of Flinroe about more monitoring of the waterways. We've met him a few times, maybe we'll get a little further with him. And that is my report.
Town of Comox, request for letter of support. The recommendation that council direct staff to prepare a letter of support for the town of Comox, or that we receive and file.
I move we receive and file.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Just an update on the Ashcroft Terminal Working Group from my end, that we've had possibly the second to last meeting, possibly the last meeting, and the outcome is 2 recommendations to be presented to the PSA group that that we pursue, or they pursue, enhanced walking trails or a boat launch. Those are the 2 items that will be presented to possibly to the inland terminal PSA group.
Is that on the sloop?
Sorry?
The walking trails and boat launch on the sloop?
No.
Oh.
So but the Slough Society will pursue gaining access to the sloop over and above the criteria of the working group. Any questions? None? And just going back to budget and administrative services, we bypassed one item, or I did. Councillor Peterson, Councillor Coomber, the asset management plan.
The additional item to the agenda.
Great.
Is there a motion to accept this? Do you need a motion? CAO?
It's to review and discuss.
This
There's no
is
motion at this point.
That's what it is.
this is to, I'm hesitant to say adopt, but, because there is, this is just part of a process. I would think that the appropriate motion would be just to receive the report and direct staff to follow up on any of the recommendations in the report.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion?
It's rather frightening. So I have to say.
All in favor? Carried. And just,
So yeah, if you guys can review these
Mhm.
and see if there is anything that needs to be changed.
It's terrifying.
cannot apply for any more.
If I may, Christina, do we need to include this when we make application for phase 2?
No, what's happening is, this is an asset management and is a good tool that can be used in application for future projects. And so this is, this report is mostly for review to see if there is need for any change. And then once it's finalized, I can apply for claim for all the projects. So right now we are in the 15% holdback, so I cannot apply for any more claims towards that project. And also we intend to apply for grants for October 23rd for the other projects.
That would be the community emergency preparedness,
Yes.
structural flood mitigation.
Yeah, and so they could use this tool to justify future projects and need for funding.
Thank you.
Yes, the
So you
more-
just want us to look through it, let you know if there's any questions we have or things that we think are missing or
Yeah.
should be in here, let you know prior to the September 28th meeting, and
And then we probably we'll have the final and that we can adopt.
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Information correspondence? There is none. New business? Go ahead.
Just a question on those slow signs for Quartz Road and Stage Road.
You were gonna get hold of Public Works
For the,
and get pricing on putting the little triangular things on the street signs.
Oh, the school zone ones,
yes.
Yeah,
yes. I've mentioned that a couple of times now, and I was under the impression that they had been ordered, but we have not received them yet.
okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Just, go ahead, Councilor. Sorry.
I suggested to CAO that we buy some fluorescent pool noodles and slice them down the side and wrap them around the poles. Just for, just for impact.
Just under new business that we probably should have dealt with it prior, but had the pleasure of attending the Ashcroft Council meeting earlier this evening. And I noticed on their agenda, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Wilden, that you're hoping to engage with the Village of Cache Creek, Village of Ashcroft, and Clinton with a shared responsibility by law enforcement officer and shared costs.
Correct.
So something that we look forward to hearing more from you on that and your council. From that form of enforcement and the costs that you might have if, and perhaps your CAO and our CAO can discuss and have that ready for October budget deliberations, provisional budget deliberations. Thank you. Questions from the press?
I have a couple. First of all, it wasn't entirely clear whether Councillor Pittman did or did not produce the letter.
She did not produce the letter.
Thank you. Now, at this meeting, originally, I understood that the cannabis survey was to be discussed, and then it was actually up on your website last Tuesday. One question that I was going to ask, because it's something that I've been asked, is if absolutely nothing is allowed, period, at the moment, what exactly is the status of the Wander Inn? Because I looked on a list of regulated legislated cannabis growers of all manner in BC, and there is nothing listed for cash.
Ongoing.
Okay. if may I ask a follow-up question through the chair? Why is it so difficult to find the status of a business that is right in the middle of town?
The status of the business?
Or do they have a business license?
No. Okay.
Wondering how a business operates on Highway 97.
We
with
cannot
that
prove
business.
that there is a business in there.
Okay.
It's ongoing. It's definitely a topic that we hope to deal with as we wade through the labyrinth of gaining cannabis and hemp legislation in our community.
Do the RCMP have the power to go in there and ask to see
It's ongoing, yeah.
Okay. And also just a follow-up question, I had here to ask about the cost of the community hall being prohibitive for a public meeting. So that was answered.